to Out of the Box Radio with me, your host, Christine Blasdale. Out of the Box Radio is a weekly podcast of audible ear candy dedicated to bringing a fresh perspective on this thing that we call life. And each and every week, we're going to be diving into the topics that matter most with lively conversations on issues such as health, wellness, and transformational healing, all with the goal of creating a better world and becoming a happier human being. I will be your tour guide for this epic adventure, and each and every week, we're going to be embarking on a journey with the ultimate goal being transformation to our highest potential. And now, let's get out of the box. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Out of the Box Radio. I am your host, Christine Blasdale, and I am so excited about today's show. Greg Palast has been called the most important investigative reporter of our time, and for very good reason. He has continuously broken front-page stories for BBC Television Newsnight, The Guardian, The Nation magazine, Rolling Stone, and Harper's Magazine. Greg is also the author of the New York Times bestsellers Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, Armed Madhouse, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, and the highly acclaimed Vulture's Picnic. His brand new film, based on his documentary reports for BBC Newsnight and Democracy Now!, is called Vultures and Vote Rustlers. I'm very, very proud to be bringing onto the air Mr. Greg Palast. Greg, welcome to Out of the Box Radio.
Thank you so much for having me back with you.
I gotta say that my initial reason why I wanted to have you on is what is going on with this presidential election, in particular the primaries. And listen, I'm based out of California. I know you're a California native yourself. Can you tell listeners and myself what the hell has happened with Bernie Sanders and the Hillary Clinton race here in California in particular? Because everybody I know was a Bernie Sanders supporter. Young people, millions of people said they went out, they tried to vote, and something happened.
That's no exaggeration when you say millions of people. I've just moved back to California. I was living in New York and in London, England, and been all over the world. And I would say what we just had in California was something I called a democracy-flavored election, kind of, something that tastes a little bit like democracy but isn't the real thing, if you consider the real thing counting all the votes. And let me give you just some numbers. These are official numbers. Forget the reality. Statewide, and we're talking 2 weeks after the election, 1,173,000 vote by mail ballots have not yet been counted.
What?
Let me repeat that.
What? Wait a second.
Almost 1.2 million ballots not yet counted. 712,000 provisional ballots not yet counted and may never be. And then 73,000 of something called other ballots not yet counted. In other words, a total of just shy of 2 million ballots not counted in California. Now, it's odd because we've read that if you read the AP reports, which are picked up by everyone, 100% of the precincts have reported. 100% have reported, and Hillary won by a landslide, which was shocking because only days before, first of all, interestingly, there were no exit polls.
Yeah, they stopped doing exit polls. Isn't that convenient?
But the polls just beforehand showed a dead heat, and suddenly Sanders is losing by 12, 13 percentage points. And that's percentage points. That means that there was a massive, massive, massive shift of vote. Or maybe the votes are lost in this non-count. Now, I didn't see the AP report the fact that when they said 100% of precincts reported, what they meant is that 100% of precincts sent in a number with some count of ballots from their precinct. So 100%, it's as if you had a radio show and you said, okay, I broadcast today. And they said, yes, but it was mostly an hour of dead air. And you said, yeah, but I was on there for 4 or 5 seconds, so I definitely broadcast. So they held an election. They gave you some numbers. Bernie Sanders lost by 400,000 votes. That's 1/5 of the amount of votes yet to be counted. Now, just so you know, by the way, if you're listening and if you know Greg Palast, if you know me, as a journalist, I don't take sides in these elections. I really don't. And I did not vote for Mr. Sanders or for Hillary. I'm not in any of those camps. But I can tell you that I'm in the kind of democracy camp. And this is ugly. I mean, I was in Azerbaijan. I was in Kazakhstan, which maybe their elections weren't quite as good. But that's about the only place where you could say California's done better. I was in Alabama, which has just started a whole new skein of racist attacks on the right to vote, but it's nothing like California. And so whose votes are lost here? In the case of Sanders, was it Sanders voters? Because it's random. If it's 2 million random, well, it would end up at the same place anyway. It's far from random. It's never random. And this 2 million votes missing is one of the great secrets of American democracy, or lack thereof. We don't count all the votes. That's not just California. That's nationwide. But suddenly, people in California are suddenly becoming aware that their vote that they mailed in a ballot, they went into a precinct, and their vote didn't get counted. So, for example, the people that really had problems casting their ballots are people whose ballots who are NPP. What's NPP? NPP just means you're an independent voter, no party preference. Now in California, if you're no party preference voter, if you're an independent voter, you still have a right to vote in the Democratic primary. And there are 4 million independent voters. Now, so they could vote in the Democratic primary, or at least try to. They were told they could. They have a right to by law, but here's what happened. If you are a no party preference voter and you want to vote in the Democratic primary, about half the voters in California get their ballots mailed to them. California pushes mail-in ballots. Half of the voters get their ballots mailed to them. If you want to vote in Democratic primary, you have to, one, mail back the ballot that they gave you, sign an affidavit saying that you want the Democratic Party ballot, or what they call a Democratic Party crossover ballot, include your old ballot in the correct envelope, and mail it in time, and then they're supposed to process that and mail back to you the Democratic Party ballot. Now, if that didn't come to you in time, you have to walk that ballot into the polling station. None of this is clear. Now, so a lot of people didn't get their ballots, didn't get them in time. The ballots that went into, like for example, when Reuters and AP said that 100% of the precincts had reported, and what they kept reporting was 100% of the ballots had been counted. They hadn't received, let me repeat this, the state hadn't even received about 500,000 ballots that had not come from the post office yet. Now, understand that it's not random. If you're an NPP voter and you mailed, the chance of your ballot being one of those last-minute ballots that still has not to today been counted, and if you're listening to this 3 weeks after the election, it's probably still not counted yet. If your ballot has not been counted, okay, you were probably a Sanders voter. Now, how do I know that? Am I the great Karnak that can see into the envelope with your vote? Yeah, kind of, because the Golden State poll, which is your best poll, said that among regular Democrats, Hillary had a breathtaking advantage, about 30 percentage points over Sanders. But Sanders on the independent voters, and I want to emphasize that the independent vote is almost as large as the regular Democratic Party vote. And among the independent voters, Sanders slaughtered Hillary by 40 percentage points. It works out about 3-1.
Wow.
So the late ballots that weren't counted, and I just read you 1.2 million late ballots. overwhelmingly would have been Sanders voters. His victory is probably in that pile alone. Now, is this unusual? If it were just California, I would tell everyone listening, if you're not California, turn off your radio and go do something better with your life. But I'm sorry to tell those listening in other states, if you think your state has a better voting system than California, there's only one state that actually, in my opinion, out of 50 states in America, the only thing that even comes close is the state of Oregon to something that you would call an honest system. But I got to tell you, this stuff of not counting mail-in ballots is one of the great hidden secrets of American voting. You're constantly being told mail in your ballot. And I'm telling you, this is Greg Palast, my friends, telling you, you want to protect your ballot? Don't go postal. Don't mail it in. I know some people are really panicked about, if I go into a precinct, they'll make me vote on a computer and they can steal my vote. Officially, in 2008, when I last looked at the public figures, there were 1.1 million votes mail-in absentee ballots that were cast and not counted. That's the official number, just thrown in the garbage. For everything from postage due, you put a middle initial on the outside of the envelope, but you didn't register with a middle initial, or you forgot your middle initial in your signature. They didn't like your signature. You left off in my case, I've made these mistakes myself. So this is what's happening, is that there's tons of reasons. And since 2008, we've doubled the number of people mailing in their ballots. So in this coming election, figure well over 2 million ballots mailed in will be thrown in the garbage. But in California, in the primaries, I would say that will be 1 million just in California. And then we get to another category, Christina. Am I filibustering here, telling you about these?
No, you go ahead, because
yeah, I feel like
I want people to know what's going on. This is a coup. This is a coup.
Well, it's been this way. And actually, the funny thing is, I've had some people who are some actually experts in the field say, well, they didn't steal it from Sanders. It's been this way in California for 20 years. As if that's some type of excuse for not counting 2 million ballots.
Right.
Because you didn't count 2 million last time, it's suddenly okay. No, it ain't. It's not okay when you hold an election and you decide that you don't have to count the ballots, and you come up with all kinds of cockamamie reasons to block the counting of the ballots. Now, here's the other problem. Something called provisional ballots.
Oh,
now,
yeah.
Here we go.
Those provisional ballots.
Now, I call them placebo ballots, because when you fill out you go in and they say your name's not on the voter roll. Or, like, for example, the woman in front of me had an NPP. She was an independent. She wanted to she had the right to trade her independent ballot for a Democratic ballot. But she didn't bring the little envelope that it came in. And they said, you can't vote except provisionally. It's the only way you can vote is provisionally. And they said, don't worry, we'll count it. And I said, that if you're going to count it, why are you giving her a provisional ballot? I told her, go home and get your envelope. If you really want to have your vote counted. She was in tears. She'd waited in line, and gets up to the front, and they say, well, no, you can't vote because you didn't bring the envelope. Oh. What are you going to do with an empty envelope? And by the way, it wasn't one crazy precinct. This was happening. This was in 98% of the state of New York. The state of California. New York has a very similar problem. That's why I messed it up there. And this is what I'm saying. The provisional ballot is something that was foisted on the United States electorate by George Bush after his so-called victory in Florida in 2000. I did a story, which you saw in Michael Moore's films or read otherwise, but I busted a story in which I discovered that Katherine Harris, who was the Secretary of State of Florida, and Jeb Bush, the governor, had worked to remove over 58,000 black men from the voter rolls of Florida, saying that they were criminals, ex-cons not allowed to vote. Now, not one of those guys, not a single one was an illegal voter. Not one was an ex-con, but not one out of 58 some thousand. but they lost their vote. Okay, but they went to vote and they said, you can't vote, you're a criminal. So the Congressional Black Caucus said, let's have a way that you can, if your name's knocked off the voter rolls, that you can still get a ballot, and then they can check to see if you were illegally removed, if you really are a proper voter. So the provisional ballot was born. It's provisional. They can check later if you're a proper voter. Now, here's the problem. The Congressional Black Caucus won the right for you to get a provisional ballot. They never won the right for you to get it counted.
Oh, my God.
And in any close election, they are not counted. Now, I've had a lot of people attack me for saying provisional ballots are not counted. They say, oh, we counted some in LA County, and I was a poll worker and counted. You didn't. There's officially in the United States, 2.3 million provisional ballots back in 2008 were not counted. That's the official number. The federal government keeps a record not only of the vote count, but the vote non-count. Now, also, I should also mention that in California and other states, when you ask them the count, they say any ballot which has been accounted for, like registered, like if they open your ballot and throw it away because they say you're not on the voter rolls, or you got a provisional ballot and they throw it away, they call that a counted ballot. So when they say we count the ballots, yeah, but you throw some of them away and don't add them to the tally. That's called casting a ballot. So when I say their ballots aren't counted, they disagree with me. They didn't disagree that it was thrown away. They just disagree with my language.
Wow.
Most beings think that if they tell you we counted your ballot, you think that means that they added your vote to the tally.
Yeah, that would make sense.
And I want to repeat this number: 712,840 ballots, 750,000 in California from our recent primary have not been tallied into the votes.
And they will never be tallied? Is that what you're saying? They will never?
Not tallied into the vote. They've not been accounted for in any way. Now, I am trying to get from the Secretary of State the total number of placebo ballots, that is provisional ballots, thrown in the garbage. He doesn't know. Now, this is the man who's supposed to be in charge of our voting systems. Now, he says we have a great voting system. I said my understanding from the information I'm getting from the counties is about 1 million. Let me repeat that. Million. About 1 million ballots in California were thrown in the garbage. When I say throw in the garbage, they always object when they don't actually put them in a round metal can. They put them in a pile of ballots that are not tallied and will be destroyed. Okay. But let's call those the ones in the garbage can. 1 million ballots in the garbage can. You just know, it could be a million, it could be 1.5 million, it could be 750,000, give or take 500,000. That's the guy who's in charge. All right? Now, I want to emphasize, people who were given a provisional ballot were overwhelmingly, in this case, Sanders voters. That is, like the woman in front of me, you had all these independent voters who are 3-1 Sanders voters who walked in with their ballots. They forgot to say their envelope. And they were told you have to vote provisionally. Then it gets tossed out later. You always get a provisional ballot. You can always, if you came from outer space with antennas poking out of your head, and you're allowed a provisional ballot, but they throw it away. Right. Now, so that's the provisional ballot. Then there's these other things. And so votes spoil in the precincts. Forget you have an ancient system in California called punch cards, which go back to the 60s. It's a 50-year-old technology used in California of punch cards. We call them paper ballots because you punch a piece of paper, but you do not mark a candidate. You punch a piece of paper, and that's read by a machine. Right. That's not exactly a paper ballot. It's a piece of cardboard with holes in it. Okay, so this piece of cardboard with holes in it, you can make all kinds of mistakes where the machine can't read it. That's called, and it's a spoiled ballot, where if you mail in your ballot with your holes, or you've filled in the bubbles, and you put an X instead of fill in the bubble, your ballot will be thrown in the garbage. Let me repeat that. There are tens of thousands of people in California who put checks or X's in on their ballots instead of filling in the little circles next to a candidate name. And those things get tossed in the garbage. Now, it used to be until the Bush v. Gore Supreme Court ruling, the courts have always ruled that the voter's intent count. You can't play games. You can't say, oh, that's a check mark instead of a bubble, or that's an X instead of a check mark. You can't play those games until Bush v. Gore. Then the law changed to whatever the voting officials agree. Now, the Democratic Party machine in California was a Hillary machine. We have pretty much a one-party state in California, Democratic Party, and the established party was all for Hillary. Now, did they specifically go out of their way to shaft Bernie Sanders voters? I actually don't think so.
I do.
Let me tell you what my view is, and I could be wrong because now I have to reach into the tiny mind of people who take away your vote, okay? And that's a small space to crawl into. So I do it with trepidation, but I will give you my theory on it.
Wear protection, will you?
Okay. Okay, I'm crawling into the tiny space called the mind of your Secretary of State, who is a Democratic Party animal creature. And he knows that the system is such that independent voters are going to lose their vote. He knows the system is such that new voters are going to lose their vote. That is, young Hispanics, young people in general, and who are 83%, that is 5-1, 6-1 for Sanders over Clinton. The first time you vote, by the way, if you registered by mail, you have to walk in with photo ID. I know, just like you heard, oh, that's only in Alabama and Mississippi and all those, Confederate flag states. No, people with shotguns in their back of their pickups. No, it's in California too if you're a first-time voter. But you don't know that till you've waited in line and driven somewhere or gone somewhere, and they say, where's your ID? Mm. And so that's a big problem. Again, there you go. You get your provisional ballot, shaft it again. Get your placebo ballot. Now, the Democratic Party knew what was going to happen with the NPP voters. They knew what was going to happen with the new voters. You had some county registrars who actually told their poll workers if an independent walks in and asks for a Democratic Party ballot, you must hand them a provisional ballot. This is an order given. And in fact, the Secretary of State didn't deny this, and when it was pointed out to him, he did send out a letter saying, ooh, that's nasty and naughty. You can't give provisional ballots to people who are independent voters. In other words, Sanders people. You can't give them fake placebo ballots just because they're going to vote for Sanders. Wink, wink.
This was but it was after the election.
Yeah, wink, wink. It's like it's nonsense. So they knew this was coming. The excuse that millions of people in California have been previously disenfranchised is not any comfort to anyone who believes in democracy. This is a criminal shame. In Florida, the infamous election in Florida in 2000, we had 58,000 black people wrongly removed from the voter rolls. Many more people than that were removed from the voter rolls wrongly in California. We had 180,000 votes that were spoiled, that is thrown in the garbage can, not counted. You remember the hanging chads? Yeah. Those were Gore voters. He should have been president of the United States, not because he had the ability to be president, but he did get the most votes. But here, 10 times as many people are having their votes thrown in the garbage can in California. Is that the record we want in California? I couldn't believe it. I just moved here. I thought I didn't think I'd ever be reporting a story about California vote theft. I did many years ago when you had a Republican. You had a Republican in charge of the voting, a guy named McPherson in California. This is, again, and if you're listening in, what I'm telling you about California, it's like everything, whether it's the hula hoop or fad diets, whatever starts in California goes everywhere. And one thing that the Secretary of State did in California, McPherson, 45% of the people that registered to vote in motor vehicle offices and in voter registration drives. 45% of the registration forms were thrown away. People were not registered. People thought they were registered because they filled out a form, but they weren't registered. Almost half the people who registered to vote in California when he was Secretary of State, their registration forms were thrown in the garbage. They'd show up to vote and their name wouldn't be there.
Wow.
And now, does this still happen? Let me tell you, I have told people, and I want to tell you, if you're in Ohio, if you're in Florida, if you're in California, I don't care where, check your registration. Every state has one thing that in common. You can go to a website. Every state has a website where you can see if you're an active registered voter. Make sure you do that. Say, I voted the same place at that school down the street for 30 years. Forget it, Jack.
Yeah. No, I know, because a lot of people right before the primary election here in California had gone to that website and they said, I don't understand. I'm registered, but I'm not listed on there. So at least they had the foreknowledge. But it's a handful of people who knew that. No,
well, I did. You know what? I got to tell you, I was on a Pacifica station, radio station, a month ago, and I said, okay, I'm doing it live. I said, I want you people to learn how to, that you've got to protect yourself. And by the way, if you're listening, one thing you can get is if you're listening to Greg Palast, and if you're furiously taking notes, I appreciate that. Don't if you're driving, but better than taking notes is what you can do is you can go to gregpalast.com and download for free, absolutely gratis, a comic book called Steal Back Your Vote, which this Greg Palast I wrote with Bobby Kennedy and was illustrated by Ted Rall, the great comic artist. It's called Steal Back Your Vote, and it's all these fun and horrific stories about vote theft, but it also includes 7 ways to beat the ballot bandits, and one of them is register, then register again, then register again. And so it's register and register and register. So I get on to make my point that it doesn't matter if you think you're registered. So I type in my name and it says, no such voter. And look, this is my business, and I thought I was registered. I'd filled out the forms. I sent them in. And sure enough, we look back at the forms. I left out, most people don't know, I actually did something most people don't do. I made a scan of my voter form before I sent it in. Turns out you need to put your zip code in 2 places, and I only put it in 1. Now, this was attached to my driver's license application, which means that they had my name, address, everything, proof of that I'm me. And in one place with at least in the back, and a couple places on the front with my zip code, but they decided to just shred my registration and not tell me. Now, this is the game that's played. But most people aren't in my biz. They don't scan their voter forms. They don't go online to check. And so they showed up at the polls. Again, these are the new young voters who thought they had registered because they got, filled out forms at a table at their college and then found out that they weren't there. Or they found out, they said, hey, I never got my ballot, or hey, I never got my card saying where I vote. And on June 1st, they looked up their name and it wasn't there. And it's like, too bad, because May 23rd was the last day to register. So too bad. So what I'm telling you is that what happened in California is like everything that happens in California. It happens first in California, though I have to say this has been going on in many places. They knew that 1.959 million votes would not be counted. They knew that, and in fact, if they're just, I used to teach statistics, they could probably have gotten it within a few thousand votes, the estimate of the votes that would be thrown in the garbage can, and they knew whose votes those were. I did a calculation of the votes that have been lost and disappeared and not counted, that is not tallied. I would say about 1.25 million belonged to Sanders. 750,000 would have gone to Hillary. 500,000, a plurality of the missing votes would have gone to Sanders, which would have given him a California victory by about 100,000 votes. And I used to teach, I'm sorry, I was a professor of statistics. I'll tell you what, any statistician, any expert wants to take me on that's fine. You tell me what was in that pile. And what I hate about this is that I see this all over America, where votes are thrown in the garbage. The difference is, as I told some Sanders people, I said, welcome to apartheid America, because for the first time in their lives, you had white middle-class voters who were voting for Bernie Sanders. White middle-class people were voting as if they turned black. This is how black and brown and now Asian voters are treated in the United States of America. They are given second-class placebo ballots, ballots that are thrown in the garbage cans, voting machines that don't work. And I'm not talking about something that's really fancy and Hollywood, switches your vote. I'm talking about machines that just simply don't work, so they don't record your vote. These are old-fashioned memory stick machines with little USB thingies. And they know that stuff goes bad, and it always seems to go bad in the same neighborhoods. So for the first time, white voters were treated like black voters, and they didn't like it.
Are you telling me too, Greg, are you saying that with California, is it over? Is there any way, in other words, did California go to Hillary and there's nothing that we can do about it?
There's plenty that can be done. There's plenty that certainly ought to have been done. And I want to tell you, I blame the Sanders campaign for much of this. And say, well, why? They were victims of a crime. Well, they were victims of the crime in the way that someone who leaves their wallet out in the open with a big sign that says, I'm nowhere nearby. I will be back in 20 minutes. Please don't take my wallet. You're asking for it. Sanders people have known for a year. This is the one defense of the Democratic Party Comintern, the Democratic Party, Jerry Brown's Democratic Party machine. They said, here's how we steal votes. We do it this way every year. We've done it this way for many years. This is how we steal votes. And you can change the system. You can warn your people. You can help them. You can prevent it. You can make demands. Change the system. You can tell people how to protect their vote, how to check their registration, how to make sure that they bring in the envelope with their NPP ballot. That all this stuff. Teach people how to vote. And Sanders did none of that. In fact, I was talking to people in the Sanders campaign who were trying to organize a review of the ballots. Now, understand what happens with a provisional ballot. And you have to ask yourself, why are there 2 million ballots not counted and it's weeks after the election? All these ballots, like these placebo ballots, the mail-in vote, the provisional ballot, they go into a room and you can participate. The Sanders campaign can designate a couple of people to go into the room
and watch.
And when they say, it's not a matter of, and remember that the real trick here is not whether they're counting a Sanders ballot as a Hillary ballot. That's usually not the problem. That happens, but that's not the main problem. The main problem is they'll say, oh, that person didn't sign their name properly. Throw it in the garbage. Oh, that person didn't bring the envelope. Throw it in the garbage. Oh, that person wasn't registered, but they were what's called an inactive voter, which is a really complex thing. It means that you missed 2 federal elections. You didn't vote in the last 2 elections. If you didn't vote in the last 2 elections, most people don't realize in many states, in some parts of California, you can't vote in this election.
Wow.
So most people don't know that. You don't vote and you don't get to vote. You lose your vote.
Wow. It's blowing my mind.
To make it clear, they should say registrations expire, but they don't. They simply call it inactive voting, and no one knows about this. You're never told that registration expires, okay? But it does, okay? Now, so they'll say, oh, well, inactive voter, no good. Oh, that was a new voter, and they mailed it in, and they forgot to include a photocopy of their driver's license. Whoop, out the door. Right. Some places don't allow you to send in a photocopy. Some places you actually have to mail in your driver's license.
What?
Yeah. If you're a first-time voter, you have to have your ID, and it can't be a photocopy. So, that's where some places play it. Now, the Sanders people knew this in advance, or they should have known this. They didn't just wake up yesterday, though they act like it. Now, it's a terrible thing to blame a victim of a crime for the crime. But my God, they had gigantic rallies.
Well,
and I was watching this. I was like in the Coliseum here in Los Angeles.
I know.
And they didn't say one word. They had these big screens. Like Sanders just said, I know most of the people in the crowd here are not registered Democrats. I wasn't a registered Democrat. I understand that. So, but if you want to vote in California in this primary, you have to take these several steps. You have to mail back your ballot. You have to sign it properly. And in some, you'll love this one. In some counties in California, if you are a independent voter and you ask for the Democratic Party ballot, and this is in Contra Costa, okay, this is one example. In Contra Costa and in Santa Clara County, sorry. In Santa Clara and Contra Costa, they told people that if you're an NPP voter and you ask for a Democratic Party ballot, you're supposed to say you cannot have a Democratic Party ballot. You have to ask for, ready for this? You have to ask for a crossover Democratic Party ballot.
Oh, jeez.
And if you don't use the magic word crossover, not only don't you get the ballot, but the poll worker, and this was, I have this on recorded, go to the gregpalast.com site, recorded, where they were told, you may not tell them, hey, all you have to do is ask for the crossover ballot, that we can give you. Nope. If you don't say the magic word crossover, you didn't get the ballot. And in some places, they gave you a provisional crossover ballot for no reason at all. No reason at all.
Which is junk.
And it's junk. And Padilla, your Secretary of State, said, oh, yeah, that's not right. Ha ha ha. Gee, that's too bad, Bernie. It's like, it's Kafkaesque. But let me tell you, this happens all over the country. New York.
Yeah, and talk about New York also, there was these major issues. And New York should have gone. I would think that New York and California, both of those would have gone to Bernie hands down.
I don't think hands down. It's a complex thing. Hillary, from the exit polls, I would say that Sanders lost by a small amount, but he was born in Brooklyn, okay? And he loses in Brooklyn because 126,000 people, their registration was simply disappeared. Again, remember that thing I told you about expiring registrations? People don't realize this. They were inactive, as they called them. So their registrations had expired. People don't realize registrations expire. It's never told to you in the third grade civics class. And so 126,000 people. Now, they're not supposed to simply take your name off the voter rolls. They're supposed to let you know that you're in danger of losing your ballot. You have to say, no, I want to basically, so it doesn't expire. I still want, you have to either re-register or you have to say, I'm still registered. Send a notice back to the state that you're registered. Now, that's complicated. 126,000 voters. Who are they? They're mostly Sanders voters because they were the people who generally don't vote. They're not the Kings County machine voters. And so they were the new enthusiasts for Bernie Sanders. And they didn't realize they couldn't vote. And most of them were given these so-called provisional placebo ballots. In New York, they call them affidavit ballots. But most of the country, they're called provisionals. But the best term is placebo. You think you voted, you haven't. They let you feel like you voted. And so here's the problem. This pretense of voting in America, this jacking with your vote is absolutely, utterly, completely unconscionable and shameful. And it has nothing to do with Bernie or Hillary or anything. The one thing I will say for Hillary, these cute tactics of not counting provisional ballots, of throwing away spoiled ballots, of suddenly saying, oops, you've expired, will all be used against her, because it's usually the Republicans who've become adept at these tricks, and the Republicans have become adept and learned how to amplify it with computers, so that I go all over the country. In fact, just a minute ago, let's see, what did he have to say to me? I just got a note from Senator Sanders, not Senator Bernie, but Senator Hank Sanders. Let me tell you the story of Hank Sanders. Can I do that,
Yeah.
Christina?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Senator Hank Sanders is in the state Senate in Alabama, poor soul. He represents, of all things, Selma, Alabama. I hope you've all seen the film Selma or know something about the history of the civil rights movement. The Voting Rights Act was born in Selma when Martin Luther King took thousands of people across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, facing the Ku Klux Klan, a vicious, monstrous, brutal police force. I know that sounds like East Los Angeles, but, this was then. In Selma, 4 people were murdered on that march by the Klan, but they won the Voting Rights Act. And so Hank Sanders was on that march as a young college student. He was on that march. And when he was on that march, his parents had never gotten the right to vote. They were black. As Black Americans, they didn't have a chance of voting in Alabama. But today, Hank Sanders represents that town in the state Senate. Now, why am I bringing up Hank Sanders? Because he called me up. He just sent me a note today. His name was removed from the voter rolls. He went to vote, and his name wasn't there. He's the senator from that town, and they had removed his name. And as he said, if they can remove my name from the voter rolls, and by the way, he's an attorney and a professor. He's an attorney, a senator, and they removed his name, this black man in Alabama. And I know how they did it. So he asked me to investigate. And by the way, these days I'm investigating for Rolling Stone and do a weekly podcast for the Pacifica Network. And but I'm doing this investigation right now, and I'm finding it that not California, thank God, but many other states have started a whole new system of purging voters. And generally, it's not Bernie type voters, which tend to be young and middle class. Oh, young always get it in the neck. Let me tell you, if you're a young voter in America, they forget it. I mean, you think getting a job is tough at your age? Try to vote. It's we have gone out of our way to make voting a horrid obstacle course, and until it was 2006, no state required a photo ID to vote, and you didn't see people voting 90 times. You didn't see dead people. You didn't see zombies waiting in line to vote. You didn't see space aliens. You didn't see any of that stuff. This myth of stopping the fraudulent voter. As Laura Minetti from Columbia University has said, you're more likely to get struck by lightning than to commit voter fraud. Because you go to the slammer, by the way, it's a federal crime, 5 years in the slammer. And anyone who gets caught really does get thrown in jail. So who's going to go to vote for the school board, or even in a presidential primary, going to risk 5 years in prison? So it doesn't happen. And by the way, I did check it. You're 6 times more likely to be struck by lightning than cast a fraudulent ballot. So it doesn't happen. Right. But they have these rules to stop fraudulent voters. And what it is it's the same stuff that they used in the South, all the Jim Crow laws. People do not realize that until the Voting Rights Act of 65 and the Jim Crow laws in voting were removed, there was no law that said a black person couldn't vote, because that was determined by something called the Civil War. The 15th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States says you cannot lose your right to vote based on the color of your skin. Now, so how did they do it? By having all these so-called anti-fraud provisions, which they have now brought back. There's nothing new under the sun. You have to prove who you are, so you don't get, because Democrats somehow, are bringing illegal aliens to vote. 5 million illegal aliens, according to one of the Republican officials. 5 million illegal aliens waiting the Rio Grande to vote for Hillary. Really?
Really?
Really. So that's the game, and the latest thing I'm doing is looking at a new gimmick by the Republicans called Crosscheck.
Crosscheck?
Yeah, Crosscheck. There is this is the latest new thing. people, we fought. It's been a very public fight over whether there should be ID laws or not, that you have to show an ID. Then there's been a fight by started by the Republican Secretary of State of Kansas, a guy named Chris Kobach, a Koch brothers creation. And Kobach started this business of saying you have to prove you're a citizen in order to vote. Now, you say, well, on first glance, it sounds reasonable. Yeah, you should be a citizen to vote. Go ahead, prove it. Number one, what's proof of citizenship? It ain't your driver's license. My chief investigator is Swiss, and she has a California driver's license. You have to if you drive in California. It has nothing to do with citizenship. So none of those things, no, the only IDs that work, you have to have a passport. And who has passports, right? There's not a lot of people out here in the barrio who've just come back from their, vacation in the Alps with their passport.
Right.
So that, so it's passports, only a very small fragment of Americans even have them, and they tend to be of the white flavor. And then there is your original birth certificate.
Good luck.
And remember, it's the original one. No such thing as, you can't use a photocopy.
There is no such thing as original birth certificates.
I have one, but it's so easy to lose, misplace, or not find, or whatever the heck. And also, there's some states where you have to prove your citizenship. Again, you have to mail in your original birth certificate, which may never be replaced. You can't replace an original birth certificate. So a passport, original birth certificate, or naturalization papers. So it's like, so proof of citizenship is like an insane demand, to the point, for example, in Kansas, which required proof of citizenship, 36,000 young voters, new voters, could not register. The courts just ordered half of them to be placed on the voter rolls anyway, but they couldn't prove their citizenship. It's a paper chase. So you're not stopped from voting because you're not a citizen. You're stopped from voting because you can't find pieces of paper. Antonin Scalia, he was the devil needed his lawyer, so he brought it back.
Yeah.
Sorry if you're offended by that. I don't care. I was offended by him. He said, that when it was pointed out to him that the average black person would need to take all day and take 3 buses to get their non-driver license ID. Because most people who don't have cars are inner city people and poor people.
Right.
Well, and so you don't have a driver's license. So if you don't have the driver's license, how do you get this voter ID? And, they say, well, you can always get a voter ID. And by the way, it's $20, so therefore it's just no different than a poll tax, which is against the law. But so you have to have an ID that costs you money, and you have to spend a day off of work. He said, yeah, but it's 17 miles. And he said, it's 17 miles whether you're black or white. Now, I happen to know that Scalia drove a black BMW. I'm an investigative reporter. This is Greg Palast, if you're tuning in. So I think what he meant is, in a BMW, 17 miles you can cover. Well, I know he got speeding tickets, so he probably could cover about 12 minutes, right?
Right.
So it's, so he said, it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, black or white. Hey, 17 miles is 17 miles. And that's just part of the game. It's like, it's no different than the old literacy tests when they would ask black people to name, if you saw Selma, name every single judge in the state of Alabama.
What?
They'd say, well, everyone is subject to the literacy tests, except the white people be asked 2 + 2 is 4. And what Scalia said is, if you've got a BMW, getting that little piece of paper, first of all, you'll have it because presumably you already have your license. Otherwise, it's nothing to go down and get a new piece of paper. But if you don't have a car, he says, but it's the same, it's equal protection under the law. And this is what's going on, more and more obstacles. And now this new thing, Crosscheck. So this new thing is the same guy that came up with, you must prove your citizenship. That's been a big public discussion. But what has been very much under the radar is something he set up called interstate crosscheck, where he says there are people voting twice. The Republicans are saying over 1 million people have voted twice.
What?
And that's how Obama won, with people voting twice. And the way that they do it is, it's real easy. You vote in one state, and then you vote again by mail or fly somewhere or drive
Oh,
somewhere, vote
come
again in a second
on.
state.
Really?
Now, how do they know this?
Oh.
He set up a computer system which is used by 30 states, almost every one a Republican state, Republican controlled state. These Republican secretaries of state send computer tapes with every registered voter in their state to this guy in Kansas, this Republican Chris Kobach. He runs it through a computer, and when the names match, he said, aha, a suspected double voter. Now, what is a suspected or potential double voter? How do they determine that? We said, well, we get their social security numbers, we get their, their full names, their addresses, all this stuff, and it sounds legit. But there was something suspicious about it. We dug into this. I've been investigating this for 2 years. The first thing we found out is that there's 7 million people on the suspect list. 7 million people. I went to experts. Like I said, I used to teach statistics, so I pretty much knew the answers, but I just thought, am I losing my mind? How do you get 7 million people voting twice? And the answer was you don't, because they wouldn't give me the names of the suspects, because they said, oh, these are criminal suspects, right? I told you. If you vote twice, you go to jail for 5 years. So they wouldn't give me the list because they said they're criminal suspects. I got the list by a so-called, but I don't know. I'll never know how it happened exactly, but one state sent me the list by accident. Okay. And lo and behold, yeah, they had social security numbers, they had all kinds of information, but they didn't use it. The only match is first and last name. That's it. In other words, and so for example, and I'm going to give you a real example, like Maria Cristina Hernandez voted in Georgia. And they said she voted again because they found a Maria Isabel Hernandez.
No.
In Virginia, Georgia and Virginia. So 2 people, they said, I mean, how unusual is that? How could you have 2 people named Maria Hernandez? Yeah, it's a different middle name, but hell, 2 million. Are you ready for this? 2 million of the names on the list are mismatched by middle name. 2 million. Mismatched by middle name. Junior, senior, they matched people who were junior and senior, as opposed to thinking maybe they're father and son, right? You know how many people named Michael Jackson? Well, it's not many people. They claim that one guy named Michael Jackson has voted about 5,000 times.
This is ridiculous.
And here's the trick. Who has names like James Brown, Jose Hernandez, David Lee? Basically, you have Hispanics, Black people, Asian Americans share very, very few last names.
And they vote Democratic, and they vote.
Yeah, you got it. And in fact, the Asian American community has turned hard left. And this new system of Crosscheck is a way to get rid of them, because I went to a civil rights attorney working from the Korean American community. And her name is Helen Ho Kim. And so she said, in Korea, we've got Ho, Kim, Lee, Park. That's it,
Right.
Because, like 4 tribes, basically. That's it. And so if you match just last name, Kim, you take out every Korean. If you're doing Kim and Park and Ho and Lee, you've just knocked out the Korean American vote, which happens to be 3/4 Democratic. And they're not used to being treated this way. So what's happened, and just like I said with the Sanders voters, suddenly they were treated as if they turned black. So this has been my endless thing. So I want to encourage people, really, no kidding, go to gregpalast.com, download Steal Back Your Vote for free. And it says you can make a contribution to our not-for-profit foundation, but I'm serious, you really don't have to. I also have physical copies. We have to charge a bit for those and make a donation, and I'll sign them. But it's the story of how they steal your vote, and the story of how you can protect your vote. You can protect your vote, but it's just not as simple as, oh, I registered somewhere on a yellow piece of paper and now I go in and I vote, or I mail in a ballot. Forget it, Jack. You got to. It's a job, and you know what? Too bad. Martin Luther King walked across that bridge. He went to jail. He was beaten. I talked to young kids. Well, they're not young now. They were 13 to 14 years old when they were beaten unconscious to get that right to vote.
Yeah.
One young woman was locked in a metal box at the age of 14, locked in a metal box till she passed out. And let me tell you, these people put it on the line so we could vote. And so if you have to check your registration the month before the election 2 or 3 times, if you have to learn the procedures for properly voting, if you have to wait in a line for 3 hours because they figured out whether it's Arizona or Ohio, they figure out where the progressives are going to vote, then that's what you got to do, man. That's what you've got to do. Hank Sanders, I told you, my favorite Senator Sanders, though I know Bernie, he's a good guy, but Senator Hank Sanders is black senator from the South, from Alabama, who walked across the bridge with King. He told me, and he walked me across the bridge. He was trying to make a point that you have to keep walking across the bridge. The civil rights movement isn't over. In fact, we've had a big setback, and we got to walk across the bridge again, man. That's what we got to do.
That is so true. That is so true. Greg Palast, you rock. I love and adore you. I'm so glad that you're able to join us here on Out of the Box Radio. And folks, he's right. If you want to get educated, and I love your website too, Greg, because you post stuff all the time, current news things that you're working on, current investigations that you're working on. Folks, go to gregpalast.com. You can find out a lot about the shenanigans that have been going on, are going on, probably will continue to go on until we all become educated and we do something about it. So thanks again, Greg Palast, for joining us here on Out of the Box today. Any final words before we head out?
Well, it's Greg Palast, PALAST.com. So gregpalast.com. I keep saying that. I'm not going to sell you anything. I'm going to give you some information you don't get. It's called news. You may not be used to it. It may seem very strange. It's like the first time you had sushi. But real raw news in the raw that hasn't been fabricated into a kind of Cheeto snack for you. But if you want real news, go to gregpalast.com and because I do put up all my reports that I do for BBC Television, for Rolling Stone, for Democracy Now!, Flashpoints, and other programs that give you the news. And you can download the pods. You can watch my television reports that are prime time in the rest of the planet, just not here. And get the free swag. Like I say, Steal Back Your Vote, the comic book. It's a great comic book. I got a kick out of it. And if and the price is right.
And I want to recommend too, people. I think you may have a link for Bush Family Fortunes. Is that still on your website for people to get?
Yes. Bush Family Fortunes is still worth watching. This was a BBC special broadcast, an hour-and-a-half investigation of Bush family. And it's still the stories we don't know, but we certainly don't want to forget. And even though it's horrific, it's also kind of fun because the Bush family, no matter how you look at it, no matter how creepy, weird, and dangerous they are, they were a lot of fun to cover. So the story has a kind of creepy cool to it that you'll enjoy.
Oh, it's perfect for our listeners. So folks, yeah, definitely check it out. Buy his books, get his DVDs, and support Greg Palast because he is needed. And I appreciate you so much, Greg. That's it for today. I want to thank you for listening to the program. Don't forget to tune in next week for another edition of Out of the Box Radio. And as always, 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 I encourage you to think outside of the box. Bye for now.